That's the thing, like really, everything's been set up. Like before the campaign started, 80 to 90% of people were who's going to play next to get Yes, we can hear him. Oh, that's enough to have it. Yeah. I was like, does Jordan control it?
I can control it. I can do it.
That's alright.
I'm just going to turn everything down because the system's really quiet.
That's you.
It should have some noise.
Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. And good evening to those of you watching online as well. I believe that we're going out live on the Murray News Facebook page. And welcome to those of you here at the Bridgeport Hotel to the 2022 Hammond State Election Forum presented by Murray News. Thanks so much for coming. My name's Perry Strathern. I'm the Managing Editor of Murray News. If you haven't met me before, Murray News, of course, is a local news service with a website and email newsletter that goes out to a couple of thousand people every week. And over the past 5 or 6 weeks, we've been looking at the state election and some of the big issues which are of interest. Culminating in tonight, of course, when we've got 5 of the 7 candidates, either here in person or online, for your questioning pleasure. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that this evening's forum is happening on the traditional lands of the Gunditjmara people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. Thank you for having us. I've mentioned myself. COVID regulations for this evening. Because this is a private ticketed event, I understand you are able to take your masks off if you're so inclined. Of course, you're welcome to leave them on if you would like to as well. I have to leave mine on because they've literally just only let me out of quarantine today, so I have to wear it for a couple more days. But otherwise, it's entirely your choice. There will be a microphone brought around for people who want to ask questions this evening. Kurt, who is assisting me up the back, give us a wave, Kurt. There's most of the bright lights right behind you, but you're there somewhere, I know. Kurt will hang on to the microphone that you can use to ask questions, so we don't have to wipe it down and all that sort of drama. Yes, Kurt Meagle is a journalist who helps me out from time to time at Murray Bridge News, so thank you for joining us, Kurt. And Jordan Holmes on the sound and video desk this evening. Thanks very much for helping us, Jordan. Murray Bridge News as a publication is mostly supported by reader subscriptions. That's the main way that Murray Bridge News gets its revenue. So while this evening's event is free to attend, I encourage those of you in the house or those of you watching online to visit www.murraybridgenews/subscribe if you're so inclined. For $5 a month, you get a few extra stories every month, and you'll support events like this to happen at election time. All the candidates were invited this evening. As you can see, we've got 4 on stage with us in person. We've got 1 tuned in via a video link. I have an apology from Belinda Owens, the Labor candidate. Unfortunately, work and family commitments have kept her from joining us this evening. I haven't heard from Tonya Scott, the One Nation candidate. Certainly, Tonya, if you're watching or if you're in the neighbourhood, you're welcome to drop in. That brings us to the end of our introduction. So we'll invite each of our candidates. You've each got a microphone, I believe. I'll invite each of our candidates just to give us maybe a minute or so of introduction to who you are, where you've come from, and why you're contesting this election. We might start with you, Adrian, as the incumbent MP.
Thanks, Perry, and it's great to be here tonight. Look, I come from a farming background. I've also been a shearer for 14 years, worked in the oil field for a couple of years, and I've had the privilege of representing Hammond for the last 16 years. And I've been so pleased to be part of a Marshall Liberal government that has delivered over $200 million worth of spending and more to come in this region over that 4 years. And part of that is around $30 million in regards to health spending, whether that's the $7 million new emergency department here at Murray Bridge, the $3 million for relocating the operating theatres and doing them up, whether it's the close to 16 million putting the 24 dementia beds and the 12 aged care beds in at Strathalbyn. Also the promise at Strathalbyn for the $3 million redevelopment of Kalimna, which will happen. It's in the budget. But also on top of that, we've got around $4 million ambulance station going into Strathalbyn as well. Also on top of that, the education spend in the area is about $30 million, whether it's the $3.9 million out at Manham, whether it's the $20 million for the high school here in Murray Bridge, the magnificent building, whether it's the $5 million for the North Primary School here in Murray Bridge, whether it's the $3 million that's coming for Langong Creek for new transportable classrooms there, whether it's the $1.8 million that's gone into Strathalbyn Fleurier campus. But also on top of that, we've got $2.1 million coming into Fraser Park Primary School, and I know it's going out of Hammond, but my old school, Coombe-Deep's getting $2.2 million. And this is all lined up with the $17.9 billion worth of infrastructure spend right across the state. Major road spending, major infrastructure spend, supporting businesses, really regenerating the economy, and alongside of the social welfare things that we need to do to make sure that the community stays strong. And I think we've done a pretty good job being the safest state and the safest country to deal with COVID. Thank you.
There's that. Look, that's out the way. So I'll tell you what, Adrian, though, you've got hefty numbers if you can remember all those investments right off the bat. I might go to John next, if I could.
So thank you. My name's John Illingworth. I've basically lived in the Adelaide Hills now for about 25 plus years. I've certainly been around through the town here. I've been a former vice president over at the Speedway, been involved with a lot of groups in the charity space, community work and so forth throughout my life. I've been a police officer for 37 years. I think what the town needs here in Murray Bridge, as well in Hammond and Strathallan, is the key places within the electorate, is we need a strong voice, we need an advocate for who we are. I'd love to support Adrian and say you've done a fabulous job, but government departments have budgets, they spend them how they wish. If they wish to build a new gymnasium, well, of course they will. We built a new police station because the old one was dilapidated, not because it was some fabulous job that somebody had done for us. If you believe those sorts of arguments, I will tell you the sun will come up in the east tomorrow, and when it does, I'd like you to give me credit for it. It's an absolute nonsense. Things will happen anyway. What we don't need to look at is the things that have been done. It's the things that have been left undone. That's the important thing for us. So things like, why are there no mental health beds at the hospital? Why is there no public transport in town? Why is it that we don't have an ambulance that transfers patients from Manham, from Strathallan and from Murray Bridge to the city so that our first responders stay here in town where we need them? What we're doing at the moment is we're taking our ambulance staff, taking somebody all the way to Adelaide and then leaving the community without those sorts of resources. What I'm saying is we need to take a holistic approach. We need to look at the broad picture and pool resources so that we can manage the situation better. What we need is an advocate. I've been an advocate for a number of organisations and certainly for victims of crime throughout my years in prosecution services. I think that what we need is change. I think we need the right sort of change. I think we need to have better community consultation, and I think we need to engage our community more in those decisions. And that's why I'm standing here in Hammond.
Thank you, John. Now, I might actually throw to Tim White, our Greens candidate, next, if I can, and we'll see if we can hear him all right, both in the House and on the stream. Tim, can you hear us?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My apology for not being there, but I'm stuck in COVID isolation, so I've been here at home for quite a while, and I'm looking forward to getting out in a couple of days. So, as I mentioned, I'm with the Australian Greens, and I have an interest in politics and pursuing the Greens agenda, which I think is quite different to the other parties, in that essentially our foundation philosophy stands as something quite apart in that we think it's important to measure the impact of our industry and our efforts across the board on how it's what sort of toll it takes on the environment, and so we measure that both in the ecological sense that pertains to both social and environmental. And I'll talk a bit more through the evening about how that translates into policy, but just a little about myself first. My work as a social worker, and I've worked across health and welfare as a social worker for 30 years, and worked in palliative care and worked in youth justice, criminal justice, and mental health, and currently I work in child protection. So I think I've got a fairly good grasp of those sectors in the community and how they should function and service the needs of the people in Hammond. And there are strengths and there are shortcomings that I think that we can build on over the coming years. In particular, service provision in Murray Bridge, being the main town, and we need to look at mental health. That's been something that has not been well serviced for a long time, and we need to continue to build that. So I look forward to talking a bit more about these things as we progress into the evening.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for joining us virtually. Cameron, the Family First candidate, I might go with you next.
Thank you, very appreciate that. Well, good evening, everyone. Hello. My name's Cameron Locke. I'm a resident of Strathalbyn. I married to a lovely Strathalbyn girl. I've 4 children, ranging in ages from 2.5 all the way up to 12. So it's a busy household. 4 girls as well, so they're lovely. They look after Dad when Dad gets a little bit older. I'm an educator. I'm a deputy principal. And for me, education is very, very important to me for our children and our children's future. I am currently on leave this year. When the mandates came in on the 10th of December last year, I refused, and so I am on leave. And
This is the vaccination mandate.
that's correct, yes, correct. And so this is a fantastic opportunity for me to represent my community and the voice of those people that feel the same way. Now, I know we have different views on COVID and the way that the mandates have been imposed, restrictions and so forth and so on. It's time to move forward. With Family First coming on board this year for this election, I really felt strongly that I needed to join and I needed to be the voice to those people. And milk, by the way, is $3.50 for 3 litres, and bread the same $3.50.
Thanks, Cameron. And Ellie, sorry to keep you waiting, but our independent candidate is up next. How are we going, Jordan?
Yep, should be on.
Check.
Hello, you got me? Yep, that's better. Thank you, Adrian.
We had the old decoy mic trick. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you, Pete.
I'll be the last one for tech support.
Okay. Thanks. No worries. Look, my name's Ellie Keane. Many of you know me. I'm from Callington, and I've been an elected member on the rural city of Murray Bridge for 7 years now. And I just wish to say that part of the reason that I'm standing is that any member seeking a 5th term and 20 years in office knows they'll be challenged. That's no surprise. I'm standing to bring real competition to an ultra-safe seat. Only by creating competitive tension between the parties can our voices be heard. The difference in the level of funding in marginal seats is astonishing. In the past 7 years, the rural city has secured just $4 million in state funding for community-initiated projects. Recently, $1.5 million was awarded for the regional stadium following my announcement. In the last few weeks, there has been a reported $60 million promised in 4 key marginal seats. We could complete Sturt Reserve much sooner if we were a marginal seat. You only have to look to the example set by Rebecca Sharkey, who secured $250 million for Harndorf. She is an active, engaged and hard-working member who initiates issues. The people of Hammond deserve that level of representation, and that's what I will deliver if elected. The main issues that have been raised with me during my door knocking and canvassing is health, housing and transport. If you want to talk about Strathalbyn, there's no after-hours doctor, the ED is closed, the ambulance service is under-resourced, the Liberals haven't committed to increase staffing despite Labor's pledge, and the $3 million committed for Kalimna has no plan that we're aware of. The money has been promised for 4 years, but we don't know what the plan is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now comes the time of the evening when we look for the bravest soul in the house, and that's the person who can ask the first question. Kurt has a microphone, I believe, and he can bring it around to you. If you'd like to ask a question, I would invite you to just give us your name before you ask. And if there's a particular candidate you want to hear from a particular issue on, then let us know. But do we have any questions from the audience? I hope so. It's going to be a long night. We've got a gentleman in the back row.
My name's Matthew Rowland, and for many of you who know me, I'm a cannabis advocate in the community. There is a bill before Parliament. Tammy Franks put in a bill to legalise cannabis for South Australia for recreational use and or adult use. What are the candidates' stances on that bill, and if elected, will they support that bill?
Do any of our candidates have a strong stance on cannabis? Adrian?
Yeah, thanks. And I've talked to Matt before. I certainly don't support going with any bill that legalises recreational use of cannabis. I've been a fervent and strong supporter of the use of medicinal cannabis, and I've certainly been aware of a couple of projects that have been trying to get ahead in the area. Obviously they keep that pretty tight, but sometimes people think that medicinal cannabis plants are something else. But what you see, and we legalised the use of medicinal cannabis a few years ago in the Parliament, and I'd like to see the opportunity with more doctors prescribing it. The doctors get a little bit nervous about new ideas, and I understand that to a degree, but what you see and hear anecdotally, it sounds like it might be a good therapy, and that's why I was quite happy to support the use of medicinal cannabis, but not enlarging on that.
Do we have any agreement among candidates on medicinal cannabis or other purposes? Sure.
So my brother-in-law, Andrew, who's about 4 years younger than me, a detective senior sergeant, had cancer, and we've nursed him through that. He died a short while ago, about 12 months ago now. He ultimately used medicinal cannabis towards the end of his life. He had difficulty managing pain. It gave him relief, and so I certainly echo Adrian's expression about the legalisation and use of medicinal cannabis. As far as recreational use is concerned, can you tell me the strength of the THC in the cannabis you intend to use? Now, the problem we've got is if you grow it hydroponically and it's grown specifically to produce female flowering head, which is substantially stronger than outdoor grown or bush cannabis, particularly the cannabis that was grown when I was a younger man. So then we look at the links between the very strong cannabis and schizophrenia and other mental health issues. I certainly don't support the introduction of cannabis that has high levels of THC. Having said that, certainly there are doctors that do prescribe cannabis as a treatment, and if that treatment is valid and justified, then certainly I would support it.
Thank you, John. And the other candidates, if you have any brief views you'd like to offer? Ellie?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew, for your question. I guess in a similar vein, I'm aware that medicinal cannabis is legal, and I support that. I'm aware that there are some concerns around cost and availability of that, which I believe could be looked at further. So that is something I would be prepared to look at if I'm successful. The other thing is I understand there's some concerns around testing, whether cannabis stays in someone's system for a long time, and perhaps if there's some inequities around that. But that's probably as far along the road as I would go. I think the problem for the drug lobby is the very great harm that illicit drugs cause in our community, and it's very hard to distinguish between recreational use and then the very great harm that illicit drugs cause. So that's the challenge for the lobby, which I'm sure you, as a very capable lobbyist, will tackle. But yeah, so some sympathies. I've also had family members and close family friends pass away from cancer who have benefited from the use of medicinal cannabis, and as well I have great sympathy for our veterans who suffer greatly. So yeah, I have some sympathies, but perhaps not as far along the road as perhaps you are, Matthew.
More Cameron?
Thanks, Barry. My answer is short. I would say no at this point. I'll be honest, I haven't done a lot of research around that, but my honest answer is, at this point, is I would not support it.
Tim, would you like to speak on this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. The Greens' position on cannabis is that we do support the medicinal use of that particular herb because it's becoming more and more apparent, it seems, that it does have considerable benefits to sufferers of certain illnesses. We do support the decriminalisation of the use of cannabis. We believe that people that use it should not be pulled into the court system. And I'm talking about recreational use there, not medicinal use. That I don't believe that people are caught using it recreationally, that the courts should have any role there. It's a health and social issue, ultimately not a criminal issue. But I will say that as a social worker that's worked in mental health, I do have concerns though about the links between psychotic illness and other mental health problems and the recreational use of cannabis. And I think that we need to be looking at that a lot more closely, and we need to be very cautious about allowing a free-for-all recreational use of cannabis in the community, because there are problems that it does create.
Thanks very much, Tim, and thank you, Matthew, for your question.
Perry, I might just offer, Matthew, I think there's a lot of notes scribbling. I might just offer one follow-up question just based on you heading on back. If I'll just one further follow-up question.
Thank you. Just to address, most of you are aware of potential linked concerns. The latest information out of a scientific study is a 20-year twin cohort study showing that there is no causal link between first episode psychosis or psychosis events or psychotic events to links to cannabis use. Just want to clarify my point.
Thanks, Matthew. Perhaps, I'm sure you probably have my email address, or you'll be able to track it down. You'd be welcome to drop me a link to any resources that you think people should be aware of. We can perhaps put that in the story. Do we have any other questions from the floor? The gentleman in the second back row. Kurt will come around to you.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Whitlow, and I'm not sure how to start the story, so I'll give a very, very brief background. I had one member of the family kidnapped, tied to a chair and tortured for about 4 hours. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. Last year, some very big people come to my house. I don't hurt anyone. I just invent things, write, research, help the community, and she. So that happened twice. And then another member of the family was that badly bashed, he had to have 3 plates in his head. And it's disturbing to talk about it now, but what I wish to know is how we're going to cut the head off the snake. How we're going to crush these bikie gangs that have now taken control of the town with other mafia and criminal elements, like very well funded, high technology, all that sort of thing. The common person like me can't do anything. You know, all right, I'm 25 kilos less now. I was quite a big man back then, but I'm thinking to myself, that's 3 people. What if all the rest of them come back for me? And I'm not doing anything. I'm just the member of the family. You know, it's not me. But I think, how are we going to deal with it? We can't throw money at the police. This is a political problem. No one in Parliament is cutting the head off the snake. It's like a mythical Greek snake. Cut the tail off and it grows back. We need legislation to bankrupt them, prescribe them as a special type of unlawful association or terrorist group. We need to crush them in every way we can financially, not throw money at police. This is a war zone now. This town is a war zone. We've got gunshots all the time, we've got helicopters flying over.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks,
ambulances. The police are losing their humanity. They're dealing with scum and trash every day. And I want to see a political solution. People in Parliament that are not compromised, that do something about this. crush them economically. Just leave them with a car and a house or something, but get rid of their money.
Thanks very much, Stephen. You obviously got in touch with me ahead of tonight's forum, and sorry to hear about your family's experiences, but thanks for sharing your passion. John, perhaps you knew this was coming, as the ex-police officer, I wonder if you could share your perspective on what's being done and what we can do about public safety.
I did still have a sneaking suspicion that was coming my way. Certainly the Confiscation of Profits Act does allow for the seizure of the assets of people that have unexplained wealth, and the number of tow trucks with Ferraris on them is sort of certainly happening regularly, and of course GT Falcons and the like. The difficulty is once you engage with a particular market segment, they tend not to let you go. They do their business for profit, and they do their profit. They take their profit seriously, and they're ruthless in recovering that profit. So there are certainly a number of things I can't talk about, but certainly we are looking at drug importation both at the border, that is to say at the national level. We're certainly looking at cross-border. We have operations of cross-border drug trafficking, and then we have links with international policing agencies, where we look at prevention and seizure. So a lot of the major seizures we see are part of a global response to drug trafficking. The difficulty we have is the ease with which some drugs are made and the willingness of some people to take them. So when we have things like ecstasy that we take at a music event, for example, we used to have tablets. Of course, pill presses are hard to come by, so we've now gone into capsules. The price of capsules have become progressively cheaper. The quality of the contents I have no idea about. But it's all done to generate profit. So unless you are looking at ways to reduce their access to market, and that's a policing response, or you reduce access to the gangs themselves, and that's a social responsibility issue. So throwing money at the police isn't necessarily going to solve the problem for you. Avoiding engaging with you in the first instance is the best option. However, once you're engaged, certainly support for victims is something that my former employer and I take quite seriously. And certainly the removal of colours disbanded certain activities for them. It does in some respects lead to other behaviour, such as having meetings over the border in Victoria, which was commonplace for a particular group. Legislation is only as good as the people that enforce it and the people that comply with it. And so I would say, yes, if you can think of ways that legislation could be made to assist you in your endeavour, I'd be happy to listen, and I'd certainly be happy to advocate for you. But it's so easy to fall into the web, where people look good, ride noisy bikes, have lots of money, take you out and entertain you, and then they want paying back in return. And you just have to be awake. It's unfortunately, and you're not the person necessarily involved in that, but the ripple effect throughout a family and throughout a broader community can be quite catastrophic. And so, yeah, they say prevention is better than cure, and that sounds really trite to respond to your question, taking the severity of the behaviour that's taking place. But certainly, you can legislate, but people have to be willing to comply.
Any of the other candidates? Adrian?
Yeah, thanks, Perry, and I commend the police for all they do against bikie gangs and other criminals. And certainly we passed legislation several years ago against outlaw bikie gangs and prescribe them. And there's one thing they hate is the fact that they can't congregate more than two at a time. There used to be big rides. Obviously, I live on the Jeeks Highway. You'd hear them coming through, hundreds of them at a time. So they can't wear their colours and they can't ride together. Some say that drives them underground, and potentially that does. But I think that has had a major piece in offsetting some of the impact of outlaw motorbike gangs. And I just want to reflect on some of the excellent police work, and it may or may not be linked with the Anon sting that was done not that long ago. Just fantastic work done by the police in society.
Any other discussion on this one? Ellie?
I just think it's very important to work in partnership. I think politicians, police, federal police, local politicians, I think it's very important that partnership is big. I don't think for 1 minute anyone in this room thinks that the story is okay, something that should happen. So I think that the partnership that they have between Parliament, police, independently, I think that needs to get stronger to be able to stop these kinds of incidences. And what Adrian said as well is they're already going on that path to try and stop that as best they can. But with all of these things, there's always room for improvement. And I think that's the key. I think we just need to continue to focus on what areas are most important out of the situation, and then work on those areas to hopefully, as you said, become ahead, but hopefully to stop that.
You're welcome to comment if you like, Tim or Ellie, otherwise happy to move on. Do we have any other? Now, I just quickly want to say that public safety, law and order is one of the big subjects where Bridge News did a reader survey not so long ago, looking at what are the issues most important to people in this election campaign. The top 5, I wrote some stories about over the past 5 weeks. These were COVID, healthcare, public transport, disadvantage, and the last issue, climate. Thank you. Yes, you can ask me what's happening next week, but what happened 3 days ago, I couldn't tell you. In that space about public safety, do we have any other questions you want to talk about that? Steve, in the front here.
Yes, Marie, I spoke with you in regards to climate change, and I would like to expand on that later. But on this matter, one of my second choices concerning this election was the undue haste with the fastest legislation passed through Parliament in the last 12 months was the Icap legislation, where it appeared that that was designed to reduce the effectiveness and the expansion of ICAC. I think if you're talking about criminality and you're talking about these large groups that are making huge profits, that's at the level that you're going to have to start looking at and how are they facilitated through the system, how are they using the system to improve their profits and escape prosecution. So I would like an answer on each candidate's thoughts on expanding ICAC and making them a real force for battling corruption, and I'd like an explanation why it was passed, why that legislation was passed almost unanimously.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve, for that question. Obviously, I asked you this in a story at the time, Adrian, but for people who might have missed it, I'd ask why the government passed the legislation that it did, and obviously you joined the rest of your colleagues in voting for it.
Well, the ICAC legislation was amended and it had unanimous support across the whole Parliament, across all parties, all independents. 69 members of Parliament voted unanimously to amend the ICAC Act. Now, that still leaves ICAC with many powers and the Office of Public Integrity with many powers to look at corruption. And one thing I would ask the community to understand is how many people have ICAC brought to justice? They've made a lot of allegations. Country members' accommodation was one, so every country member was investigated. Not one conviction in nearly 2 years. One of my friends recently, after 20 months, was finally told no case to answer. I would estimate that inquiry alone has probably cost $3 to $4 million minimum of public money. So, and also Frank Pangello's ICAC committee heard many harrowing stories, and I've heard harrowing stories from the people who work for the Transport Department. There's one lady, it cost her $500,000, cost her home, and has tarnished her forever over an alleged debt of about $1,200. And as I said, they haven't achieved one conviction. And there's one person you can't ask about ICAC, and there's possibly others, for the way they operate and tapping people's phones, bugging your houses. These people are worse than the SS. And that's Doug Barr, police officer, who took his own life 8 days before he was cleared. So I hear you, yes, let's get law and order right, but you have to ask 68 other members of Parliament why they was supported unanimously.
Would it be fair to say that public money spent on accountability and transparency is money well spent, but is there a way that we can spend that money better, I guess?
Well, that's fine, but I would suggest that with inquiries that start with sections of the media and a former ICAC commissioner making allegations, and then 20 months on, after they've put someone through the ringer, just about torn their family apart, killed their reputation, and that's fine if that's how it works. But I would like to think that investigators, if they're worth their mettle, and there was actually corruption there, would find it far sooner than that. And my sympathies go out to the family of Doug Barr, because you can't bring him back.
Ellie, I think we'd like to... Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say, Steve, in relation to that is that what's really important is that the public know how to report allegations of corruption and that they've got confidence in the process. Now that the laws have passed, it will be important to review their effectiveness and, if necessary, make adjustments, and only a future Parliament can do that. If I'm elected, I would be open to such a review. So I think that pretty much says it. The laws have passed. It was done in a hurry. There are some people who question that, but it just needs to be kept an eye on and reviewed going forward.
Thank you, Ellie. I might actually throw to Tim next, if I could, as a member of a party which does have representation in the Parliament at present. Tim, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I'm aware that our Greens MPs in Parliament, they voted for the amendments to change the ICAP legislation, because it was apparent right across the board in Parliament that there were sections of the legislation that weren't quite right, and the process is similar to any legislation in Parliament. That over the years, when legislation is put into practice, it becomes apparent that there are aspects of it that aren't serving the public as well as they could, or they become outdated. But certainly with the ICAP legislation, it was not working from the Greens' perspective, because it was being applied in a way that was not only sort of ineffectual, but it was harming people, and it became detrimental to the well-being of the public sections of that Act, and it did require amendment. But I'm aware of ICAP, because in my work in the public service I've had dealings with ICAP. I've certainly referred an issue of unethical conduct to ICAP, and I believe it continues to have an important role in our public life in South Australia. But it's a better ICAP now because of those minor amendments, and we hope we won't have a repeat of the harm, that's unnecessary harm it has caused individuals through what became clear was damaging processes.
Thank you, Tim. Cameron, John, anything to add, John?
Despite the allegations, the presumption of innocence rests for everybody. The presumption of innocence is what protects you and it protects me from criminal allegations turning into convictions, turning into loss of employment. Obviously, I know Doug Barr quite well. I've known him for a number of years. It's really important that we don't have an act that says you can't discuss anything with anybody under any circumstances, but I can read it out from the paper. It's really important that my personal integrity is not smeared all over the front page of the tabloid when it's only an allegation that I'm ultimately cleared of. We're still left with that no smoke without fire. As a personal opinion, I must stress it's a personal opinion only. If you have a job to do, and that is to investigate an allegation, then do so within the parameters of the legislation that was set for you. And that means to keep it confidential until it's completed and the person is taken to court and prosecuted. If they were the cricket team, they certainly wouldn't be Australia, would they? Because so far they've got no runs on the board. We need to have faith in the people that investigate allegations of misfeasance of public office. We need to have confidence in the people that investigate allegations of misappropriation of your money, and we need to make sure that criminal activity is brought to justice. If the old ICAC had the capacity to do that, they would still be operating under the same legislation. And I'm mindful of what I can and can't say.
On that point, just quickly, do you think that it would help, I'm obviously speaking as a member of the media here, but do you think that it would help public confidence in ICAC if the hearings were more open and transparent? For instance, if someone rings me up and says, I understand that such and such a matter has been referred to ICAC, I can't touch it with a 10-foot pole, I can't write about it whatsoever, because as soon as someone says the magic I word, it is absolutely not worth touching for a media outlet. Do you think that more openness would help, or would that ultimately just hinder would that cause more reputational damage to people?
We have a person that is not only presumed innocent, but ultimately found innocent, and yet their details and the nature of those allegations were known by more than the people that needed to know. The outcome for that person was to take their own life. No, it doesn't work.
Just a quick point of clarification. I don't know if it's entirely accurate to be saying there's no runs on the board. There were certainly some convictions through ICAC, so I think we do need to just be clear about that. It has had some successful convictions, and yeah.
Thank you. I think we can certainly agree at the very least that it's an incredibly high stakes agency, and it's critical that we get the settings right. Just quickly, Steve.
I know there's other topics we'll get onto, and just get onto it, but just why is it that ICAC are not actually prosecuted? What is the actual issue there?
Okay.
Yes.
Steve, for those on the live stream, Steve's asked why is ICAC not prosecuting? Do we know if ICAC is prosecuting people or not? I'm not sure. We might need to take that on notice, I think.
No, I can answer that, Barry.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, if I can just place that sort of in a broader legal framework, even though I'm not a lawyer, but I understand the ICAC legislation is quite separate to the legislation that gives powers to all of our courts in South Australia. We can't consider ICAC to be a court. ICAC is an investigator, I understand, and when it has completed an investigation, if it believes that those that come before ICAC have committed anything criminal, then ICAC hands that matter over to the court system for that process to then be activated. So they have very different powers, and ICAP is not established as an agency to formally prosecute. It's an investigating agency, I understand.
Thanks, Tim. It's an important distinction. I think, turning back to public safety momentarily, I think we had another question from the front right-hand corner of the audience. Is that right? Balance, you have no, not for now. Any related questions? Kevin in the middle with the check shirt. Kurt, bring you the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. This is to the four candidates, not to Adrian. In the event that you're the elected member for Hammond, and in the event that we have a hung parliament, and you're approached by the two major parties, what is going to be your decision? Are you going to support one? And what would be the main topics or projects?
What's on the wish list?
Exactly.
What's on the pizza menu?
Be very interested to hear your comments.
Evidence? Ellie?
Look, thanks very much, Kevin. Look, if I am elected, and you know there is an if there, given that we are in ultra-safe territory, and if either side need the numbers to form government, then I'm happy to have discussions with both sides at that time. So we have to wait and see. My focus is very much on delivering my message to voters in Hammond that they have a clear choice, and also that, sorry, I'm just reading my notes, but yeah, it would just be a matter of wait and see and have discussions. I've worked for both sides of government. I've worked for Liberal and Labor in my long career. I'm very experienced in that field, and yeah, I'll have discussions at that time and try and get the best deal for the electorate. So that's essentially the answer.
Are there pet projects you have in mind, Ellie? What's your branched broom rape? What's your go-to? I shouldn't dig up old wounds, I know. Too soon.
Yeah, I do know that reference. Look, it's all about health, housing and transport here. It's ambulance services. I've been advocating strongly for extra resourcing in Strathallan and Manham for ambulance officers. We also are missing out in terms of major housing renewal projects. There's been a range of major housing renewal projects in the city, and we've missed out. Our housing stock here is old and needs renewal. We need a greater range of housing types. We all know that homelessness and housing stress is a massive issue in our community at the moment, so that's huge. They're just a number of things that I would advocate for, and I think in my material, which I know you've been following, Kevin, in the election, has covered the main issues. But I will just add that I have put on my platform additional money for Sturt Reserve, because I know that as a safe seat we are missing out on some major projects, and that project would bring tourism, jobs, it would boost the local economy, it would support local families. It just has so many widespread benefits for our community that is one of my issues as well. But yeah, health, housing and transport are the big ones.
Thanks, Ellie. Cameron?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. For Family First, it all depends on what the issue is. It really does. You'll notice, some of you may have noticed that Family First have preferenced Liberals and Labors differently throughout the electorate. And that's purely been based on how the sitting member has voted on previous issues. For instance, whether it was to do with abortion, the Spears Amendment, whether it's to do with legalising prostitution, whether it's to do with euthanasia, those issues, Family First would look at the issue and then we would make a determination. Okay? If it's to do with small business, if it's to do with grants for small businesses, if it's to increase healthcare capacity for regional areas with extra paramedics, those sorts of things, we would be on board for that. So, in short, it would depend what the request was, what we needed to decide on. Yes.
You'd be open to doing deals with both sides.
Okay.
You'd be open to doing deals with both sides.
Absolutely.
Tim or John? Tim?
That's a good question, and I would, if I was in that position, if I'm end up in that position, certainly I have a number of issues that I think are crucial for Hammond, and the first that comes to my mind is housing, and in particular housing for those on lower incomes. That those people have largely been shut out of the housing market because of how the housing market has evolved over the past 20 years. They cannot afford to get into housing. So I think Murray Bridge being the key population centre in Hammond is right for good public housing, and I emphasise public housing, not sort of general construction, but housing that people on lower incomes, whether they be on a Centrelink income or a lower waged income, housing that they can afford and housing that gives them long-term security. So I think that would be high up on my list. The second that comes to my mind is the River Murray. That the River Murray continues to be a matter that remains unresolved in terms of the health of that river. It continues to will continue to require attention as climate change impacts on water flow. So we'll have to, the Greens will want to be ensuring that we've got a good balance of ecological, environmental flows, but that balance with the needs of the farming community. And I'll just highlight another issue which is sort of, I think, one of my sort of pet interests, and that's mental health. Having worked in that field and in my work as a social worker, I touch upon that issue regularly, that we need to boost mental health, community-based mental health services in Hammond, and that's not going to go away, that problem either, I don't think. So those three issues come to mind immediately as ones that I would take to the negotiating table.
Thanks, Tim. And just quickly, is there anything that you think the state government should be doing in particular on the River Murray, or just a general increased focus, I guess?
Well, it's difficult for the state government to tackle that issue by itself, obviously, because that river's flowing through a number of states, and so it requires constructive negotiation between the state government and the federal government and the commission that has responsibility for that river system. So it's not a straightforward matter to resolve overnight, and people need to sit down and have some serious discussions about it to make it happen well.
And just quickly, as a Greens MP, would you be willing to support a Liberal government if they come up with the best offer?
Good question. Best way, I think, for me to answer that question is that we would take as you referred to, our wish list to both parties, and we would be very keen on assessing their responses to our wish list.
No worries. And lastly, John, if you became the kingmaker, what's on your wish list?
Wow, I've never been called that before. It's actually quite a simple question. It's quite a simple answer. Now, ordinarily, Nationals at the federal level would have preference Liberal, and of course we have the Deputy Prime Minister, obviously, Barnaby Joyce. We have David Gillespie, Dr. David Gillespie, the Federal Minister for Regional Health. A number of people. We just had the Agricultural Minister, David Littleproud, come through last week. So we've had a number of our national colleagues down here from the federal government. Having a look at Hammond in particular, we certainly think that Hammond is a seat that's winnable for the party. If the question is, will you, as a matter of course, settle with Liberal, the answer would be no. Not as a matter of course. One of the really good things about National Party between state and federal is we're allowed to have a disagreement without having to suffer repercussions as a result of that. And the River Murray, as Tim's told you, is a really good question to raise, and perhaps now's the time to address that. Whatever goes past my door is a waste, New South Wales. We don't agree with that. We're involved in environmental flows. I mean, we use it for our drinking water. The Ilingworth pipeline that takes it up to places like Mount Barker. We need the river for a lot of purposes other than for water skiing and evaporation in the lakes. And that's what a lot of people further upstream seem to think. Now, look, there's a lot of water coming down now, and unfortunately that's as a result of some very adverse circumstances in the eastern states. But we do disagree, and we disagree quite strongly on things like the river Murray. So the answer is a simple one. Who gives the best genuine deal for my electorate? Because you can promise me $270 million for a hospital at Mount Barker, but will it actually happen? And then when I say where is it, so we have to borrow the money to build that hospital, and then you, the people of Hammond, taxpayers, have to pay for it with interest because they're borrowing the money to pay for it.
We're talking here obviously about the Labor promise to
Yeah, so if I'm going to get a promise from Labor, 270 million for a hospital, 240 million, sorry, for a hospital, I'm not interested in promises, I'm interested in guarantees. What's best for our community? What works for us the best? I don't want a $1.9 million ambulance station built at Strathalbyn with a shed big enough to house 4 ambulances when the town has one and it's run by volunteers. Let's think about what really works for us. Let's get a commitment of money for that, and then I'll decide. I won't be bound by previous behaviour of the federal colleagues because we've already got that agreement in place that we will go with who we think gives South Australia the best deal.
Thanks very much, John, and candidates for some interesting answers. Now we've kind of edged into an environmental area and into a health area. Do we have any questions in those areas? Up the back, and then Kathy, we might go to you after that if we could. If you could just say your name as well for the benefit of those watching.
Hi, I'm Tracy Pills. I'm also involved in finance, so getting a little bit away from environmental and health. What would any of the candidates, if successful, do about the decline of banking services in rural and regional areas? They're declining everywhere. And I'm a banker, as Adrian knows me well. We have lots and lots of elderly people that have no access to financial services if the banks keep closing branches in Charlotte, sorry. It's a big issue, particularly further out, Namaroo, Pinaroo, those types of areas, even down Meningie Way so far. It's, there's no branches other than Tallymen on the last one on the line, and at Manning. So it's a big issue. And I'd like to hear that response. So that's one question. The second one is a bit shorter, to do with health. The monopoly that Bridge Clinic have on Murray Hospital. What can anybody offer? Any changes or any ideas about how we can get the other clinics to also work in the Murray Hospital and break that monopoly as well? Thank you.
Thank you. We must spend just a very quick minute on the banking question. Do candidates think that there is a role for government to play in decisions made by the banks, by these private businesses?
Look, essentially it's a business decision by the banks. And I can tell you, I was joking about being the last one to give tech support to Airlie, or anyone for that matter. But I've had to learn to bank online for the very matters you're saying, Tracy, and it's very, very important, and it does take service out of local towns. So perhaps it's about having discussions with the banks and having education sessions on how people can move forward. The issue you have is a lot of elderly people don't even have internet access and don't want to know about it, and I can completely sympathise with that. So it is a complex issue, but it's a bit like, and it's a different level, but any shop, whether it's a shoe store, an irrigation shop, a fertiliser store, suddenly deciding we're not needed, a farm services store. So it is a complex issue, but it needs a lot of working through to get the appropriate arrangements so that people could still do their banking. I mean, I used to write cheques all the time, but you barely see it these days.
As the proprietor of an online news business, obviously I'm very aware of the fact that not everyone has internet access. Not everyone has the understanding necessary to read the news online every day or every week. I'm not sure if you have any other strong views on that. Ellie?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I think the role of an MP is to try and tackle any issue. So if that was an issue that was prevalent in Hammond, I mean those towns are all in the killip at this stage, but it can happen anywhere. I know there's towns through the Adelaide Hills that have lost their banks.
We certainly have consolidation of two banks here in Bridge Street.
Yes, yeah. So the role of an MP is to advocate and find solutions for any issue facing the community. And there are ways and means of doing that through finding alternative avenues, whether it's through the post office or another agency that will provide some banking services. I know previously some chemists have provided banking services. So it's a matter of working together. It's up for someone like yourself to identify the issue and then we work through a solution. And that is, in essence, the role of an MP. So, I'll be prepared to tackle that should I be elected.
Thanks, Ellie. Now, I suspect that the applause that followed your question might have been for the second of the two barrels. The question about Bridge Clinic or about private GPs practicing in the emergency department at the Murray Bridge Hospital. It was a huge issue at the last state election as well. Now, my understanding is, and I'll stand corrected from the audience or our candidates, my understanding is that it's not necessarily a Bridge Clinic hospital thing, but all of the GPs who are rostered on a hospital or are registered to serve in a hospital are Bridge Clinic GPs. Am I incorrect in that? Does anyone know? Adrian, perhaps you could talk a bit about, as the MP, you might have an insight into the arrangement and the rationale behind it.
Well, look, my understanding is that it's not unlike most of the country hospitals across South Australia, and I reiterate most, not all, have an arrangement with with a private GP clinic, and it's been the arrangement with Bridge Clinic now for decades. Obviously, at one stage, they were the only clinic available here in Murray Bridge. Very proud to deliver a new emergency department, but yes, staffing and access and cost, major factors, absolutely. But there's one very simple equation that needs to be worked through, and the Bridge Clinic doctors, in my discussions with them, and I've had many discussions with them, would welcome doctors from the other two clinics having access to the emergency department. But it's not like the old days, and Tracy, you remember Doc Gooden, he used to deliver the babies, do his rounds, do the car crashes overnight and do it all again the next day without much sleep, and we don't expect people to be doing that all the time. But the simple fact is, the other doctors, whether they're from the two local clinics or from elsewhere for that matter, if they wanted to join Bridge Clinic in managing especially the emergency department access, they need to get credentialed, and that's one of the big issues. And I can tell you, the Bridge Clinic doctors, they would welcome that hand over fist. And what I would say is the government is working alongside them to make sure that we keep a sustainable system, because it isn't sustainable in the longer term wherever you are to keep paying locums, whether it's $2,000 a night or $3,000 a night. I've also dealt with the odd, Victor Harbour is a 24-hour clinic that's staffed with doctors down there. Obviously with the Murray Bridge GD they need to be called in. But when I looked after Goulburn for 2 terms, my second and third term, I was aware of many matters where that wasn't successful either, people waiting for 4 hours for service. Now how that works, and it wasn't as if they were rushed off their feet, I can tell you, because I got all the feedback, and I'm not having to go at the staff or the doctors, people waiting hours for service. It is a complex matter, but it gets down to the nuts and bolts of whether people want to be credentialed and be on call to assist the operators at Bridge Clinic in that ED, and I can assure you they would welcome it.
Does that answer your question at all, Tracy? Or Ellie?
Yeah, I'll also address this one. I've had many people raise this issue with me during the course of the campaign, and I have also had meetings with or at Bridge Clinic to better understand, better inform myself about the issues. So I guess a couple of things. Firstly, I do want to acknowledge the doctors and nurses who have kept us safe through COVID. They've worked tirelessly and deserve our gratitude. The doctors are on short supply and are overworked, and as Adrian said, not all of them are opting in to be on the roster. So there is a real shortage issue. The other thing is, in terms of the complexity, we can't afford to upset the apple cart, if you like, in terms of we don't want people just going to the ED, during the day all the time. If it's not an emergency, they don't need it, because they can go to the clinics during the day. But I do feel that there is a really legitimate issue to be looked at for after hours emergency care at the hospital. And that's where my focus would be if I'm elected. I have had many people, pensioners, people on low incomes, who are unwell and are frequent visitors, and the cost to them is exorbitant, and they're really feeling it. So I do think that there is a legitimate issue there that needs to be looked at. I do think there is an equity issue for our community, because we do know that people who live in the city can go to the major hospitals in the city and not be charged for whatever the issue is. So yeah, it is an issue. I've had discussions. I really feel there is something to be looked into there, and if I'm elected, I will certainly be willing to take that up, understanding the complexity of the issue though.
I'll look this very quickly. I think a review's in order. I think that's very, very obvious that needs to occur. Anytime something's been happening for a while, you tend to get the same results. And so without a review, things can't be brought to the light that need changing, perhaps. On your first matter regarding banking services, sorry, I didn't have an opportunity to talk about that. From a Australian government point of view as well, the Commonwealth Bank moved to our market. And so that was something that my family had to get used to, online banking. And it's always difficult when something that you know and you rely on is suddenly taken away from you. And so as earlier, I still think an MP's role is to do what you can, as much as you can, for your constituents. And I think that's a very valid point, and I would happily do that.
Barry, can I make a comment there?
You certainly can, Tim.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment in response to the matter of the doctor shortage in Hammond. I read only a couple of weeks ago that yet again another story of a country town in South Australia where the doctor was leaving, and the residents were wondering where they were going to obtain their medical support from. And I've been reading these stories for several decades now. It's just a constant problem in rural and remote Australia, the doctor shortage. And I can only think that the only way to resolve that is, it comes down to the question of supply and demand. And I think the universities have to start training more doctors, and the government has to look at it from that perspective, because this is a problem that's been going on for decades now, and it's still not resolved. It comes up so regularly for discussion, but it's not been approached in the most appropriate way, I don't think.
Thanks, Tim. And I know Adrian wants to respond to that. John, I'll give you an opportunity as well after that.
Well, just on that, rural generalist training, and that's what you need in regional areas, takes 12 years. And we've got a rural generalist school up at Berry that is well and truly underway. We've also brokered a deal with the Rural Doctors Association, $188 million over 2 years, which is a 20% increase to make sure that we can attract and retain country doctors, and we are onto it. But it's like everything. It's about resources, and a lot of it is about human resources. And I've seen it at Tailem Bend many years ago, and the international doctors are a great asset to our communities, where we attracted an international doctor to Tailem Bend. We gutted the old nurses' home and turned it into a lovely house, but then education and choices made by the family, that doctor moved on to Adelaide. So it's a very complex matter, and I note the difficulties that regions have, but we are spending money trying to get on top of it, and there's also locum services that get used. We've also got the SAVES network, the South Australian Virtual Emergency Service, which does great work, where nurses can be on the job. There's about 4 or 5 cameras look at a patient, and a patient can be assessed remotely, say at Pinaroo, and they might need the Royal Flying Doctor or not, with a plane, or say at Lameroo or Manham, for instance. If a doctor wasn't available, the nurse practitioner can be there, and you can link direct through to doctors in Adelaide or somewhere virtually, and it's a great service, and that can decide in triage manner whether that patient is fine there, or needs land transport, or can be helicoptered or airlifted. Yes, it is a big problem, and it's not one that can just be fixed by money. It's about human resources as well.
Thanks, Adrian. And John?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we've discussed in, that touch with me. So the first thing is any long-term arrangement ought to be subject to regular review. I suspect that it is. If it isn't, it needs to be. One of the problems you have, if you start having people providing the service at a hospital that is not employed by the hospital, you end up with a situation at Strathalbyn where the emergency department's closed because the doctor doesn't want to do it anymore. So all the time you've got doctors that want to do it, you need to keep the emergency department open. If that emergency department closes, and I'm not going to bat for the doctors here in Murray Bridge, I'm just talking about emergency departments in general. If that emergency department closes, where is your next emergency department? Mount Barker, half an hour away by ambulance. We'll have to airlift you to get you to Flinders in time if it's significant. Mount Barker is going through a revamp now. It still doesn't have enough beds. What we're building is a hospital for today, bearing in mind only 15% of the 1,300 hectares that were set aside for residential development have actually been built on. So the issue at Strathalbyn is not enough doctors involved. One doctor leaves, you now have no emergency department. So all the time we have a working system, I think it should be supported, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be reviewed. The other thing is, when we look at opening up hospitals, for example, if we make the hospital, we employ somebody at the hospital, and I'm now using Strathalbyn as an example because I know there's a lot of commercial incompetence material here in relation to Bridgeport. If we have that hospital open, there's a tendency for people to go there after hours because they get bulk billed. There's no gap fee. So instead of people consulting a GP during the day, they'll go to the hospital after hours and get treated for nothing. Now I'm sorry, but that's a draw card for people. And so you do need to be mindful about how you charge for services. And that's a fine balancing act, and I'm not supporting any of the candidates, and I'm not arguing with any of the candidates. It's just we do need to review the process. We need to make sure that the best value for dollar is being delivered. What we don't want is to find that we don't have an emergency department and then we're stuck. They don't have one out at Manham worth mentioning, and I'm not being disrespectful to Manham, But what they do have is 2 doctors living in what should be aged care bedrooms because they don't have accommodation for the staff that work at the hospital. It's just not good enough. We need to be thinking about us regionally and how we resource our hospitals regionally. And I know it's easy just to think about us and our hospital, but when you start factoring in resources, you need to look at the bigger market. Roughly 50% of rural GPs are overseas trained doctors. There's a reason for that. We have to look at things like what they call WIPs, workplace incentive payments, which are paid by the federal government to GPs to work in rural and remote locations. I'm advocating that we review that process to make it more economically viable for doctors to come and work here. If I have a general practice in Rose Park in Adelaide, I can charge basically whatever I like. I get the Medicare rebate plus a large co-payment from the patient. Would that work here in Murray Bridge? Would it work in Hammond? Would it work in Strathalbyn? And the answer is no. So what the doctors that do the bulk bill is they get paid less. Now, if you were a doctor and you wanted to get remunerated, paid for what you've done, and 12 years of study is exactly correct, that's how long it takes to get a rural generalist in your town. Do you want to bulk bill or do you want to get that plus a co-payment from the patient? So it's not viable for doctors to come and work at Murray Bridge and Strathalbyn. So unless we can create that workplace incentive payment, federal government payment, through our national colleagues, our National Party colleagues, federal government, to make it more worthwhile for them, that's the first problem we have to do. The second thing is, if you're a young doctor and you've just finished your 12 years, so now, let's face it, you're about 30 years of age, you have a partner, you come to Murray Bridge, is there anywhere to live? No. There's nowhere to rent, there's nowhere to buy. And by the way, where will my partner work? Or should I stay in Adelaide where my partner's got a job and I can get more money? So there's a lot more to the complexity of this issue than just the bridge link. And I get that, and I don't know that we've got a complaint about service delivery, although we've got some issues in relation to payments, co-payments and government funding. And certainly that's subject to review and it needs to be kept that way.
Perry, just a point of clarification. Yeah, I think we just need a quick point of clarification about the situation in Strathalbyn that I've picked up through discussions with the senior doctors there, that the ED has been closed for 2 years. We've been told that it was because of COVID, and then it was recently revealed that it was also because of the shortage of doctors. But there's 2 other important things you should be aware of. I was told that the relationship between the doctors and SA Health has broken down because the health bureaucrats have been very difficult to deal with, and that the ED is run down. It hasn't been maintained, and that the prospect of reopening it is really challenging unless it's invested in significantly. So that's the intel I've had from Strathalbyn. So I think that those things should be kept in mind.
The question came up about where is your next emergency department. I think we'd probably hope that the next emergency department is here in Murray Bridge, given the investment we've had in it. I'm not sure if that's what you were going to speak to, Adrian.
No, I just want to make another comment about Strathalbyn. It is certainly our intention to open Strathalbyn ED as practically possible. And part of the reason it is shut down, and there's 2 major reasons, as with many co-located emergency departments with aged care, shut down during COVID. That is a fact. To keep people alive in those facilities. And yes, there is a resourcing issue, and we are looking at both of those, and the Health Minister knows that I am on his case, and he's assured me that it will be reopened as soon as possible.
Thank you.
John, could I just make one quick comment, please, to that? And I don't dispute anything that Adrian said, but I have had the benefit of speaking with Stephen Wade in 2018 at a public meeting much the same as this at the Strathalbyn Town Hall, when I said the money that you're promising to revamp Glimmer has already been spent from that particular regional network. There is no money to revamp Glimmer. Both he and Josh Teague said publicly that they will find space for those bed licences and they put them in the hospital. They promised they would revamp the Kalimna Nursing Hospital, and one of the discussions was to make it into a specialist centre. 4 years later, you're being promised that we'll be doing something with Kalimna again, and that we'll be doing something with the hospital. In 4 years' time, I suspect there'll be a public meeting much the same as this, where somebody's going to be telling you, we're going to be doing something with Kalimna, and we're going to be doing something with the hospital. Now, I understand health is a bit of a poison chalice, and Stephen Wade, I think, has done a good job, but I haven't seen the results in Strathalbyn, and I'm not sure I should be counting on it here in Murray Bridge. Adrian?
Well, look, I've had the benefit of talking to Stephen Wade a bit later than 2018, but I just want to reflect on a couple of things that have happened in Strathalbyn before I get to Kalimna. The dementia care beds and the aged care beds, 36 beds altogether, a magnificent facility that we put in Strathalbyn with state money. In Kalimna, because I was at that forum in Strathalbyn, had $1 million attached to that budgetary process on where we take Kalimna. Kalimna is very important to Strathalbyn people. They fundraise for the land, they fundraise for the people. Sadly, Labor decided to shut it down because they figured it wasn't safe for people to live there, and people that had morphed into aged care from what originally a supported residential care was its initial process. And even though that, from what I understood, people could have been lifted out with blankets if anything happened, people were uprooted from their homes at not much notice and were put all over the hills and all over the place. It was terrible. But I can assure you, there are contractual discussions ongoing virtually as we speak, and we've tripled the budget for Kalimna, and we want to make sure that we get the right outcome, and this is what everyone's been talking about. We're consulting with the community so that we get that used in the proper way to support the Strathalbyn and surrounding community.
Thanks, Adrian. And just briefly, do we have a follow-up from the back of the room?
I might just jump in there. We've had quite a few discussions online around health as well. One has been pivoting a little bit, and conscious of time, so it might be a 30-second answer from all candidates. That there's been a few questions raised about the ever-going issue of public transport. So I guess the question to all candidates, and conscious of time and answering as many questions as we can in the room within 30 seconds, is the age-old question: Adelaide Metro to Murray Bridge and Strathalbyn.
The Adelaide Metro. Obviously, by way of background, this was also a major issue at the last election. I know that you had hoped for a feasibility study into that, Adrian, but the government in the end hasn't come through. Could you explain a bit about the point we're at?
Well, that's right. I'd love to get Metro ticket up here, but it's like every budgetary outcome. As a member of a major party, we have to actually fund what we deliver, and we're already putting tens of millions of dollars into funding the link services that already come out here. So just as we've got to the stage where the department were going to do the feasibility study, the contracts for renewal for all regional bus services came up. I worked with people that came to present to me to try to get better outcomes. And so currently it's not feasible at the minute because it'd be a great break in the current contract. Because I'm estimating we're about 2.5 years in that contract with Link of a 7-year contract. But I would love to see it to get that accessibility through to Adelaide. Obviously it's from Mount Barker on.
Was there any detailed... Was there a contractor who would have looked at public transport in this region as part of that process? Was there a feasibility study of some sort done at that time, or was it, I guess, decided by the Minister and not something you could have input on?
Well, not Metro ticket as such, but we do have public transport here. It's not Metro ticket. You obviously got to pay the fee to go towards Mount Barker. But I came across especially one operator that put their hand in the mix, and that gets decided by an independent panel inside the department, and they didn't get the contract, but it would have literally halved the fares. So that was progress. But for whatever reason, and it's an independent process inside the department, they didn't get it. But always working onward and upward to get that outcome.
Candidates, is there anything that you foresee we can do to get the public transport or a metro ticketed service of some sort to Murray Bridge? Ellie?
Well, just say, well, yes, of course there is. If there's a will, there's a way. The governments can fund it, they can subsidise it. It's essential for our community. It's an equity issue. The fares here are vastly more expensive than elsewhere. I did catch the bus here during the campaign to do some research. Cost me $15.20. I had to have cash. The other option was I could ring up this bus station the night before and pay over the phone, and they would have my name on a list to say I paid for the ticket. And I think if you told someone from Sydney or Melbourne that that's how you got a bus ticket in Murray Bridge, they'd just laugh at you. We need a better bus service. It's absolutely clear. We need an affordable bus service, and we need an equitable bus service. Thank you.
This is not a criticism of Adrian. He tried to get us a metro ticket 4 years ago at the last election. That was a promise. The problem we have is the two major parties are city-centric. They're quite happy to spend money in Adelaide. There's about 1.2 million South Australians live in the greater metropolitan area, and you fish where the fish are. There's only about 540,000 people out in rural and regional South Australia, the area of national support. Now, I now move to something Ellie said. If you're in a marginal seat, you tend to get more bang for your buck because they need your vote. If we were a marginal seat and not a safe Liberal seat, Adrian may be able to give you a different answer. And it's not a criticism of the person, it's a criticism of the major parties, city-centric. So the other thing I'd say is, for those that have read the article I wrote for Perry, the Keogh Ride bus service was provided at Mount Barker as an on-demand bus service. It was so successful that they extended it out to include Littlehampton and Manning. The model worked so well, they've now taken it up to Nooria, Angaston, up in the Barossa Valley. Why don't we have a similar service here? Now that's part funded by the Department of Transport, who are city-centric focused. For them, the outback is anything just past Mount Lofton. Okay, they think they're supporting regional South Australians because Mount Barker is bush. Total nonsense. Now I have a lady who has 3 children going to high school at Eastern Frio School at Strathallan. She lives at Allington. She pays $126 per child per month in school bus fees. So if you want to talk to me about public transport, I want to say, why isn't the Department of Transport funding us? Because we're a safe seat. Why don't we have metro ticket? Because we're a safe seat. Why couldn't Adrian keep good on the promise? Sorry, the undertaking? Because we're a safe seat. We're being left out in the cold because the two major parties do not want to focus on rural and regional South Australia, which is why we have the public transport issues that we have. I'm trying to keep that as short as I can.
I do have a prominent hand up in the audience with a point to make perhaps. Kurt will come around with the mic if you can say your name. And some more over here. Now we're not doing the Mexican wave just yet. If you could give us your name, questioner.
My name's Rosalie Fidge, and on what you've just said, I'd like to know what processes are in review to check on the departments who don't pass such a, giving a contract out that would save people and cost half the amount. Why aren't those types of decision-making processes checked on and somebody brought to account for it? Because they sit in an office, they've got their buses and their cars and their free parking or whatever, and they don't live out here where pensioners can't get around if they don't have a car, and they ring for a bus and they have to book it in and make sure that they're there sitting out in the heat or the cold or the wet for an hour for a service that may or may not come 15, 20 minutes or an hour later, and then you've got to book it to come back again an hour later where you've got to sit and wait for another hour if you've got stuff. It's not good enough. people making decisions for our area who are in the city on saying, no, we won't have that service, I think they should be pulled to account.
So you're asking, I guess, why the decision is made by department bureaucrats rather than by our elected representatives. Adrian, can you shed any light on the process?
Well, that keeps the process independent of the politicians, and I can assure you I've lobbied hard over many, many years for this process. In fact, it was the first question I asked in the Parliament in 2006, and yes, that's a long time ago. It is a long time ago. And I'd just like to thank you for acknowledging the dial-a-ride service we do have here, and I do acknowledge, like you said, you could be waiting for an hour to be picked up, and certainly, as I've said, I will keep advocating to make sure that we get all the services we can get and the services we need. And the issue for me is that we have to fund them statewide, and already for Metro Ticket it costs us about $500 million a year. But I acknowledge what you're saying. Absolutely. We're the second fastest growing regional centre in South Australia. And let's keep going. The current contract runs out over about 7 years, so it must have about 4.5 years to go. And let's get better outcomes for everyone so we can get those links towards the city.
I know we had a couple of other hands up a moment ago. Here they come. I might send Kurt around to this side of the audience. Let's start.
Thank you. My name's Annette Corsi-Bar, and I'm an advocate for women's and children's rights and a strong advocate for regional issues being taken forward into Adelaide with our country cousin, our city cousins. Now, we've touched on something tonight that I believe is crucial. You may not. It's not a vote catcher. Over the years, there are researchers researching throughout Australia and South Australia disadvantage. Some of you in this room might have read those reports. One of the last ones, which would be the 5th or the 6th, they put out every few years, puts Murray Bridge in the top 20 disadvantaged areas. Now, all I'd like tonight, it isn't a vote catcher, and we've had many issues discussed beautifully. What I'd like to see this group here tonight is to raise their hands to say, Annette, whoever you're involved with in this town, will you please try and go ahead with some sort of initiative rather than receiving these reports from the Jesuits and from, I don't know, somewhere in Melbourne. I don't want to see another one come to Murray Bridge. I really don't. And all I'm asking of you here is to raise your hands and say, Annette, whoever you're working with, please set up an initiative, do something. Would you do this for me? Please raise your hands if you believe. Just go ahead with it. Come on, put your hands up further. I'll take it through to the Mayor, and I'm going to take it through to other places. And we have touched on some antisocial behaviour in our community. The helicopter things, and then the police sirens going, and whoa, we get it, we hear them. Okay, if we can somehow get an initiative of our own going in Murray Bridge, it may be, with a little bit of luck, that we can sort of bring that back a bit. With the sort of disadvantage I'm talking about is where a child goes into a kindy and cannot talk, cannot hold a conversation. They don't know the words to use. And they have to go around and get another person employed to be the social worker to help the little kid to talk. Right. Now this is here in our community. So I don't know how many of you put your hands up, but I would reckon it'd be 2/3. And I'm really happy, and I'll take this to where it's important and see if I can get something done. The second thing is, I really want those people sitting on the podium there individually to say to me and Ed, I know Adrian tries his best, he really does. Whenever there's a letter written and it's signed by the mayor or whatever, you take it forward, you dig in, and if the people down there are not listening to regional issues, just stay put until they understand what it's like to be here. I want you to promise me that, Adrian, the people at the back, yes, I'll go down there and I'm going to really, really, educate our city people. And then come back and tell us that you've done something about it. Thank you for this evening. I have heaps of regard for everybody up there, but I'd like to see this very small issue, which is actually huge, brought out into the light. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for the work that you do and have done for the community over the years. Can I surmise that your question, I guess, is asking what can the candidates do about this entrenched disadvantage in Murray Bridge?
Putting their hands up, 30, 40, 70 people. I have got that to take forward. And I'm not so sure that she's going to cut it down in town.
And it is happy that the community support is there for combating disadvantage in our community. And I know it's there on candidates too. I might actually throw to you, Tim, first. I know that this is a particular point of a focus of your campaign. Are we doing enough to combat families who are living in poverty and struggling to make ends meet and educate their kids? Abject disadvantage.
Profoundly abject, as close to just disadvantage. Poverty disadvantage, something.
The real serious disadvantage. Thank you, Annette. Tim.
Yeah, so Kerry, I couldn't hear what the lady said without the microphone, but I believe the thrust of her question is disadvantage, in particular the town of Murray Bridge, if I'm hearing her correctly.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a bit more broadly about that initially, if I can. Now, the Greens' view is that Murray Bridge is a significant population centre, not only in Hammond but in South Australia, and it's going to be a centre of growth over the coming years. And so it's going to require input to boost services right across the board, whether it be health or education, welfare, housing. The infrastructure needs of overall and the service needs of Murray Bridge are going to continue to grow significantly. And that lady correctly, sorry, I didn't hear your name, I apologise for that.
Annette, that was.
But she did identify I think is an important problem of disadvantage, and as the population of Murray Bridge grows, I think that we can, if there isn't proper service provision, I think we may see disadvantage grow. So the Greens believe that it's important to look at the total picture of Murray Bridge, the growth it's going to endure over the coming years, because that question has to be answered. How are we going to deal with disadvantage as it arises in many particular areas? So ultimately, it comes down to good service provision and a special focus by government, as Murray Bridge being one of our growth centres in South Australia. So the Greens would give that across the board attention. Yeah, and I hope that's an adequate answer for that question.
Thank you, Tim. Do any of our other candidates want to weigh in on this issue? Cameron?
Yeah, I'll look, disadvantage, that's an incredibly serious issue, so thank you for raising that. We've got to break that cycle, and I think that's very, very important. And in trying to incentivise businesses to come to Murray Bridge and the regional areas, to encourage traineeships, those sorts of things, education, increased education possibilities here in Murray Bridge is so very, very important, because that cycle at some point needs to break. And it is a long-term goal, but that's okay. Long-term goals need to start with something small, don't they? And they need to have a plan. And so whether it's through increasing business, whether it's through allowing greater opportunities for traineeships or the like, and you're talking about the younger ones coming to kindergarten, or whatever, not being able to talk, having some targeted early intervention for those children is desperately important through the services that hopefully we can provide more of here in Murray Bridge and Strathalbyn and Manning as well. If we can't catch those things early, those particular children have incredible difficulties later on in life. The gap just widens. So in education, I'm very, very passionate about finding an area, if there is an area in a child's life, early on, let's solve it. Let's do it as quickly as we can, so that disadvantage doesn't increase over time. And I think that's very, very important.
John, Annette, quickly? Do you mind if Kurt brings in the mic for a moment? Thanks, Kurt. Just so our viewers online and everyone can hear you.
Right, here we go. Very quickly, sustainable funding is what we want. The services are here, they work together, they collaborate. One of the things that's crushing for the workers who put really, really great programs together, and for those who are receiving the programs, is to have funding pulled either fully or a little bit, and so you've got people sitting back. So you people, can you stand up for funding, appropriate funding for programs in Murray Bridge? Sustainable funding, not pulled like Vicky Chaplin pulled it, middle of 2020, off went the victim support services right across the regional centre. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Annette.
Thanks, Annette. That sort of brings us back to the marginal seat, safe seat. It also brings us back to the who will you form government with. A lot of those questions keep coming, looping back to where we started from. It's one thing to talk about profoundly disadvantaged people and marginalised people in our community. But when I say to you we've got intergenerational unemployed, there's a perception that these people actually want to be unemployed because mum and dad have made a life living on Centrelink benefits, and therefore that's the life that I choose for me. So I did actually write for Period just a short article trying to explain the difference between a CV and a functional CV. So the people that apply for the jobs that the new businesses bring in the traineeships, if you were employed, what are the first things you ask? Show me your academic record. They don't have one. Talk to me about your past work experience. They don't have any. Talk to me about your life goals. They don't have any. So those people apply for jobs, and what's the response? No. How many times does somebody who actually wants to get out of that cycle of poverty have to listen to the word no before they give up? So I'm looking at things called functional CVs. What is it that you can do? So that's the first answer. The next thing is I spoke to the the director of the kindy here in Murray Bridge, and she was talking about Indigenous youth and how she's trying to get them into playing sport and playing basketball. So you don't mind working in a team. It's a functional CV issue. You can play the game by the rules so you actually understand there are parameters of what you can and can't do. When you employ an Indigenous person, they're the one Indigenous person in a room full of white people. How would you feel as the one white person in a room full of Indigenous people or African people or anybody else for that matter? So it's about now, do we try and get two people to work together that are friends? So they've got somebody to lean on and increase their likelihood of success. But to try one thing once and it doesn't work does not remove all marginalised people and all disadvantaged people from the equation. Because their life is more difficult, it does require more effort to get them away from where they are. And they're not where they are because they want to be there, it's because life doesn't afford them those opportunities. So what I'm advocating for is counselling services that are funded that focus on these individuals to try and give them those opportunities, because there are jobs. There are jobs here in the Bridge, there are jobs in our region. but they cannot get them without assistance. And we need the funding, we need sustainable funding, and it comes back to the argument about who you support. The people that do the best for our region, and that's with whom you'll form government.
There have been some wonderful programs in the Murraylands over the past few years. I think of Jobs for Murraylands with Christine Willersdorf, and some other programs, LDP, which have supported people who have ambitions to try and break into that world of work for the first time, which is so difficult. I know that, Adrian, you wanted to make a point in this area as well?
Yeah, you stole some of the words from out of my mouth, Perry. And certainly, and you're absolutely right, we do need to keep supporting people, and we do, whether it's directly through programs or whether it's through government programs, whether it's through non-government offices across the board. But Perry just made the point, some very successful programs that we've been part of, partnering alongside the federal government as well, and Christine Willersdorf done magnificent work. We're giving long-term unemployed the training so that they can access jobs. I've got a lad, I haven't caught up with him for a while, that I met through one of these awards nights when they got their awards for going through the program, and he got a special award as well, just offhand I can't remember the award, the second award. But he was rapt. Some of these people have never been shown any appreciation for what they do. And it really moved me to see that. And I run into this guy occasionally. He started out at Costa's picking mushrooms, fantastic. Well, within 2 years, he's a supervisor out there. And I saw him one night and he said, you know, Adrian, I'm off the dope. I've taken a partner on the first holiday. We're moving ahead. And that is a real successful story. But that stands alongside a lot of other success stories. And we partnered in here to get training for this very hotel. Over $300,000 of state money went in, 50 long-term unemployed. There was multicultural groups, Indigenous, Anglos like me, everyone. Now I don't know how many are still here, but they were given one heck of an opportunity, and absolutely, I met some marvellous people that through no fault of their own, they've been long-term unemployed. But we just got to keep moving on with these programs, because that is how you break the cycle, because I believe this is also the land of opportunity. Because alongside that $200 million that we are investing and have invested into this region, there's about $1 billion worth of co-investment when you look at what Costa's, Ingham's, Thomas Foods, 2,000 jobs alone will go out there once that's fully prepared, and 4,500 jobs behind that. And they won't be all on the processing floor, I can assure you. There'll be a lot of, absolutely we'll need some houses. And I've long advocated for housing developments like Newbridge, when we opened up Gifford Hill, and there's 3,500 potential, well, there are 3,500 housing blocks there. And I've had many discussions with council over time about the potential to open up 3,500 more housing blocks inside Murray Bridge. But that argument gets a lot more complex now, because people have moved to the regions because of COVID, and the supply of raw materials, and not just timber, it could be bathroom gear and all of that kind of thing. Absolutely. We need the housing. In talking to Darren Thomas, he's keeping a lot of it to himself at the minute, but he's thinking of innovative ways to move ahead with that as well. Absolutely, we need to do that.
I think we'll be moving on to housing in just a second, but quickly on jobs. Do you think that there is space for the state government to invest more in programs like the partnership that you had with the Bridgeport Hotel for other large employers who are looking to train people up?
Well, absolutely there's space for it, and I'll be making sure that we push ahead with those programs, because I've seen the success stories. And I know, for instance, Darren Thomas has got training rooms as part of the new project there. They're building the beef plant first that will be operational later this year. And so you've got employers partnering as well. So absolutely, there is a place for the state government to co-partner, absolutely.
And Ellie, you wanted to make a point, I think?
Yeah, thanks, Perry. Look, thank you, Annette, for your question, and I appreciated your time meeting me here, actually, earlier in the campaign. And I do also want to just acknowledge Kathy Smith, the Rural City of Murray Bridge Citizen of the Year, who is involved in a huge range of social support programs. So I think really the whole reason that we're here is that we're offering you choice this election. You have had, a member who's been here for 16 years, going for 20. You've got a range of other candidates giving you a real alternative this election. And really, I'm certainly advocating for change and to do things differently and better. And to be, if I was elected, I would be wanting to be hands-on, working with you, Annette, and you, Kathy, who have at the grassroots and you know what's going on, seek your advice, listen to you, ask you what you need, and to then advocate for you to get permanent programs or funded programs. You know what works, and then we need your advice to let us know that. I was a participant on the Murray Bridge Safe Zoom call a few weeks ago, and that was quite enlightening. We did hear from the high school principal that coming back this year, there's been about 50 students that just haven't turned up. So there are real issues in our youth. They're deep-seated issues. We can't be flippant about it. We can't sit here and pretend that we know all the answers, but the answers are within the community, and we need to work together, really put the shoulder to the wheel and commit ourselves to finding the solutions and funding the solutions. That's why I'm here as a candidate, offering you change, offering you a choice this election. Okay?
Thanks, Ellie. Now, I'm aware that we're getting close to 9 o'clock. We've probably only got time for one or maybe two more questions. Is there anyone who wants to put the housing question into words? Or Kathy, you might have something else in mind? Kurt, she has got something else in mind. Kurt, if you could bring the microphone around the front. And if there's anyone after that who hasn't yet asked a question, then you might have room for one more. So here we go.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kathy Smith, and here tonight I'm wearing my hat of the chairperson of the Suicide Prevention Network. I've also worked in the mental health sector for about 15 years. My question is, it's a long question, well, I'll read this bit first. The Liberals have promised walk-in mental health services in Mount Gambier, Mount Barker, and I think it's Riverland, is it? Yep. Why is Murray Bridge, which services Mid-Murray, Coorong, Murray-Mallee regions, being overlooked as a possible site for a walk-in mental health service? As Annette has said, we're a low socio-economic area, and we do have a high level of suicide in this area and in all the other areas like Mid-Murray and all those. I guess in my work life I've seen a young man present to the clinic for anxiety, taking up a room for 2 to 3 hours while he's getting over his panic attack, and only to be sent home. A young lady who self-harmed, so severely she presents at the hospital, then gets sent home, and that's a weekly thing for her. And that, I've also had an elderly couple who's presented at my office, which at that stage was available for people to walk in. The wife was really distressed, her husband was suicidal. Without the walk-in accessibility of my office at that time, we could have had a life lost. I'm sure, so then my question is, why isn't Murray Bridge the first option for a mental health walk-in site? And what will the other people standing do for the mental health services within Murray Bridge and the surrounding areas?
Thanks, Kathy. And obviously this is a difficult topic. We'll get to our candidates in a moment. I just want to make clear to anyone in the audience or anyone watching along on this video that help is available if this is a topic that brings up issues for you, if you're struggling with your own mental health. Be sure to get in touch with Lifeline 13 11 14 or another support service. Kathy's here. People are in the community who can help you out. But I'd like to hear, yes, what our candidates might like to say about this issue. We might start with you, Adrian, since Kathy's asked in particular about why we can't have a walk-in mental health service here in the Murray Islands just yet.
Yeah, thanks, Perry, and thanks, Kathy. As you know, I'm very involved in the Suicide Prevention Network program. We launched the Ski for Life last weekend for their 10th time, and they raised well over I think it's $250,000 for suicide prevention. But I absolutely take your point, and we've only recently announced these new walk-in clinics, and I'll be making sure that Murray Bridge gets the next one. But that doesn't mean to say there's not mental health support here in Murray Bridge. There is primary care health support here for those suffering with mental illness, and there's also for acute mental health care, and I know it's in Adelaide, but there's obviously beds in Adelaide, country mental health beds in Adelaide as well. But it is something that we do need to localise. Absolutely, Kathy. Absolutely agree with you. And I'll be working hard to make sure that we're the next cab off the rank.
Thank you. Are there any other candidates who want to chime in on the issue of mental health?
Yeah, can I say something, Gary?
Yes, Tim?
Yeah, I can't answer the first question as to why the government has not adequately funded mental health. I don't know why, but I'd like to make some comments from the Greens' perspective. Now, our view of mental health is that for too long it's been the poor cousin in the overall healthcare system, and it doesn't have to be that way, because the provision of mental health care is not expensive in comparison to the provision of other health services. It's only a very small percentage of people that are suffering a mental health illness that need to be hospitalised. The vast majority can be adequately cared for in their homes in the community, and the way to do that is to establish small community centres dotted through the towns in Hammond, where staff are rostered around the clock, 24 hours a day. They can receive members of the public at the clinic, or they can venture out to their homes and support them in their own homes. It's not difficult to set up, and I don't know why governments, it seems to me, have always found that too challenging. Mental health provision is not hard, and it doesn't have to drain the health budget in the way that it seems some governments seem to think it does. It's a very cost-effective service overall in terms of saving lives and providing that emotional, psychological, mental, moral support to people in the community from community-based centres. It's a very efficient and effective way to deliver service by being located out in the community, open 24 hours a day with a range of social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, supporting people in their homes. It's proven to work, and it needs to be given a lot more emphasis across not just Hammond but South Australia as a very effective model of service delivery.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate your comments.
I 100% agree with Tim, absolutely. Look, what hasn't helped, obviously, the last 2 years of COVID, we've just seen an exponential rise in mental health. And so, to me, it's really a non-argument. It just has to happen.
Thanks, Perry. I know of a particular ailment that people get. It affects 1 in 5 people at some stage during their life, and that particular ailment can kill them. So now tell me what we're going to do about it, because that's what mental health is. If we look at mental health as a health issue, let's look at treatment. So if you turn up to a GP and it's the cry for help, that cry for help says, "Doctor, help me. I feel like my life's not worth living anymore. I need to do something." That doctor will sit down and do a mental health plan with me, for which they get paid a reasonable sum of money. They'll offer me medication, and likely offer me to go and see a psychologist. How long will it take me to get from that day to the day I walk in and sit down with somebody who can give me the help I need?
6 months. Yeah, 8 to 9 weeks.
8 to 9 weeks makes some sense. Yep, absolutely right. It's more than 2 months. That's what I've asked the question of a number of people, and it's surprising when you tell people you have lived experience, the number of people will come and share with you their story, the number of people that will explain what went wrong for them.
So, if we know that mental health affects 1 in 5 people, why does it not have a greater priority in our community health system? Why do we not have beds locally for these people? Why do we have to send them away where they have no family or support network around them? We do need to address it better. There are models of care that we could implement. But again, you fish where the fish are. You're one of the two major parties. You're spending your money in metropolitan area. And that's why we don't have a healthcare system that addresses mental health here in Hammond.
Thank you, John. We might have Ellie, yes,
Well,
certainly.
I wouldn't mind just addressing that just briefly. I think obviously this is a massive issue across our community. It's a growing issue, as has been mentioned. But I think just in the last 2 years, and with the introduction of mandates and people being forced out of their jobs that they've done their whole career, because of vaccine mandates, has pushed another group of people to the edge. And so I think it is now time for the mandates to end. And I think that there was a role for vaccine mandates to achieve certain targets. That has, by and large, been achieved now. And I really think it now is time to bring people back to their workplaces, to their bowling clubs, that they can have a coffee in a local cafe and try and reunite our community as we should be, to address at least that angle. That won't address the issue for many youth. It's a much broader issue, but we really do need to do as much as we can as a community, and we need to be united and move forward so that we can support each other going forward.
Thanks, Ellie. Now, we have drifted past 9 p.m, but I think we've got time for one more question. Jerry, Val, I'll let you folks figure out who it's going to be from.
I have a question about housing.
A question about housing. Kurt's got the microphone just behind you. This might be our last question for the evening, I think.
I've covered a bit of it. Look, just 2 questions.
Over the gentleman, Jerry.
We were having a housing crisis when there's at least 70 applicants per rental house, private rental house. And we're having a crisis when it takes people on Category 1, the most vulnerable in society, 6 to 12 months of persistent ringing of housing SA you can get through, and it takes an hour to be able to get a house. And that's just a stepping stone for them to be able to perhaps then get a job as to build it, get up on their own feet and afford the private housing, and may be able to one day. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
I'm homeless now because there is no housing in Murray Bridge, and the last 2 rentals we've had have been sold out from underneath us in the last 12 months. And we're pensioners, and we cannot afford to pay $300 a week in the private rental market because this council hasn't had the foresight and the government hasn't given the money to get some public housing happening here in this region.
For those listening along, just one moment, sorry, Val, for those listening online, for Tim's benefit. Rosemary's spoken about being made homeless as a result of being turfed out of rental properties and the complete lack of public housing and affordable housing available at the moment.
And I want to ask each candidate to come up with very specific details about what they intend to do to make sure that the most vulnerable members of our community can get housing. Because kids are suffering right at the moment, let alone those trying to escape from DV, particularly under COVID conditions. Housing SA is selling as many properties off as they possibly can. And also, what are we going to do about Thomas Foods, making sure that when they come to town, we don't have the same exploitative situation of rack and pack and stack 'em with overseas visa people coming into town, having to live in appalling conditions.
Exactly. Thanks very much, Val. And just to be clear, obviously, Thomas Foods not the company that's exploiting people directly, but landlords. And yes, let's note that. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Could our candidates talk housing? What do we do about it?
Look, absolutely. And there is a crisis across the board, but the problem is exacerbated by the previous government across the state cut 7,500 houses public housing across the state. We've currently got a program in place. There's $398 million building 1,000 houses across the state, and we're like everyone else in the market, and some of those are here, some of those are here. And there's also obviously non-government entities that operate in this space as well. And yes, we need more and more and more. And I'll be doing my best to make sure that we keep that ongoing. And I can assure you that anyone that comes into my office, and we've had a few and we've assisted them, we have a direct line to Housing SA to try to get them up the chain to make sure that they get a roof over their heads. And absolutely been committed to that over the 16 years I've been in, and I'll keep doing that. And as I indicated, been working with Thomas Foods and other employers, and it's going to be difficult, but there will be ways to do it. It will be a massive build, but it's also about the resources for the build. I do want to outline a story where I met this guy at a business lunch, and he's pretty keen to catch up with me later because I talked to him exactly about this issue. And he said, I can bring $1 billion to Murray Bridge to build houses. But the bit where I stepped back was where he was going to give me half of the 10% profit that he wanted to get. I just walked straight away from that, I can assure you. But yes, absolutely. Those in dire need of social housing, the worker housing, it is something that will be addressed as time goes on because it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed.
Perry, can I just...
Go for it, Ellie.
Yeah. So the housing has been a major platform as part of my campaign. The $398 million that Adrian refers to, not $1 has been spent in the Murraylands. Okay? So there are major housing projects right across the metropolitan area and not $1 here in Murray Bridge. Well, there is certainly no major housing renewal projects in Murray Bridge. We know that they're just not here. Our housing stock is old, it's the wrong type, there's not a range of housing types and styles to meet different housing types. You know, we don't need a 3-bedroom home, 3 or 4-bedroom home and a large backyard for every household type. So there hasn't been the investment, there also hasn't been any voice advocating for it here. So that is what you'll get, with new representation. That is what you will get. You will get a voice that will actively lobby and seek to have some of that investment delivered locally. There are other issues. There are planning issues as well at play. In Murray Bridge, we've got very restrictive planning settings so that the whole west side is locked up. It can't be subdivided and developed, and there is huge opportunity there. There's also restrictive planning settings on some rural properties where I know of examples where farmers have lost their workers because the workers are being squeezed out of their rental accommodation. Those farmers would have the money and the space and the resources to build housing or build worker housing on farm. They're not allowed to because of the planning settings. So there are solutions out there, but because of the restrictive settings we've got and the lack of advocacy to change those restrictive planning settings, there's no solutions coming forward for our region. That's why you now have the opportunity to elect change should you wish.
Thank you, Ellie. Obviously, it's not my job to shill for any particular party, but I know that there's a story on the Murray Bridge News website that I uploaded yesterday, perhaps, or today, about a Labor commitment to building public housing, including in Murray Bridge. But our other candidates, I'll open it up to you. The housing issue, the housing crisis. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that word crisis when it's applied to housing in South Australia and certainly in Murray Bridge. And I'll make the comment that even if you get through to on the phone to Housing SA, you're wasting your time probably because you'll end up on a long waiting list. So the green solution for this problem is that we have to rebuild public housing in South Australia that it has been diminished over the past few decades. Housing stock has been sold off, and the responsibility for the provision of housing to the people of South Australia has been pushed into more and more into the private sector. So the Greens' view is that the only way, and this is the only way to resolve this crisis now, is to construct, our goal is 10,000 houses a year over the next 4 years, and for them to be built within the public housing sector. Because, to be real about it, there is no way in which people on lower incomes are going to be able to get into their own homes unless those homes are provided to them through the public housing sector, and that's the reality of it now. The situation is dire for many people, and this is one policy area that we need to get our act together on, I think, because it's heading down a pretty dark road, and the lady is quite correct in saying that the cost of rentals for people, whether they be on an age pension or any of the Centrelink sources of income, but and also on the lower waged levels, they just can't break into the housing market now. It's a near impossibility. We've got to rebuild public housing in South Australia big time, and that's a government responsibility. We can't hand it over to the private sector. Government now has to lead the way, and the only way to do it is that Housing SA has to become a significant government department now in the provision of housing to those on the lower incomes in our communities.
Thank you, Tim. And John or Cameron, do you have?
We were talking about mental health before, and it just adds to the problem, doesn't it? And just seems to be piling on top these issues that we've been talking about tonight. I agree, more housing. We've got to pay for it, but I see housing as a necessity. Obviously, it's not something that you can do without. You need housing. And whether that's through, if you're in a position to buy a new house, whether it increase in grants, whether reduction in taxes or stamp duty, all those sorts of things, that adds money to houses. Reduction in those, and Family First will be looking at doing introducing a family wellbeing index. So looking at your total situation and then what grants will be available for you to access based on your needs, based on your income. So short term, obviously houses take a while to be built, and particularly with materials not being available, all those sorts of things. So how about in the meantime we offer subsidies? How about we offer subsidies for situations like yourself where you just can't afford it but you need a house? So yes, that may be a large sum, I understand, but it's better than having someone living on the streets or living somewhere else without a roof over their head. Okay.
Thanks, Cameron. John? There's a shortage of houses because they were sold by one government that now wants to offer you more public housing to solve the problem that they caused. But that candidate's not here to answer for themselves, so I won't take that any further, but to me it's patently obvious why we are where we are. The other thing is, certainly we need to have more social housing. I've said that and I'm on the record as saying that. It's pretty obvious that we need money spent in our town. We also need maintenance contracts for people in our town. What I don't want to see is a contract that goes out to a company from, I have a particular company in mind, so I need to be mindful, that brings people in from interstate to build our houses. So the money disappears from our community, goes somewhere else. And I've got builders like, I'm allowed to mention the company name, Kookaburra Homes, for example, busy as a one-arm wallpaper hanger.
2 year wait.
Sorry?
On buildings. 2 year wait. They wait.
Yeah, busy as a one-arm wallpaper hanger, building homes. How good is that for our community? But local businesses building local homes with local workers are solving some of their housing problems. The difficulty we've got is how do we argue for no more than our fair share? And that's what I'm advocating for.
I don't think all the money should be spent here. I certainly don't think that none of the money should be spent here. But I do think it's about time we got our fair share, and that's what I will support.
Can I just say?
A quick finisher. If Kurt can bring you the microphone so we can all hear.
And I just say that I do acknowledge that there are a few homes that are subsidised on the National Rental Incentive Scheme. However, I tried for 2 years to find out where to get the application form, to fill out, to submit, to get on the list. In the end, I rang around Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and went into the local people here who I had to go back to 3 times to get the paperwork, to submit it, to be told that when and if a house comes up, you have to go with the other 50,000 people we're going to advertise it for the one house. Now, and that's just to get a reduced rent and a subsidy of $40 a week or $50 a week, right? It is not good enough. We get empty promises with empty purses, and people end up in the backyard of somebody's house living in a caravan or something because they no longer have a house to live in, because the houses that are let for rental here in this town are either too expensive for the top end of the market, or they're dives that have no garden, no cupboards, they don't have any amenities, and you know the landlord doesn't care about the house, or he'd put more effort into it, and he's not going to care about you either. But it doesn't help, because on a pension you can't afford to pay those things, even if you could get something to rent.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Could we please put a moratorium on housing SA?
Just 1 second, Malcolm. Do you mind if Kurt brings the microphone down? We might call it a night right after this.
Just quickly, 2 suggestions. Can we put a moratorium on the Housing SA not to sell any more properties from now on? Okay? To house everybody on Cat 1 at least. And secondly, we're the only state that doesn't have a rent-to-purchase scheme. Can we please bring that back so people on low incomes can pay their rent towards purchasing their place, and that will give Housing SA more money to be able to invest in new buildings. But why are we the only state that hasn't got an essential system like that?
Thanks very much for that comment, Val. Much appreciated. I think that one of the things I've enjoyed about this evening's forum is that we've been able to talk about solutions. Yeah, we've got some ideas from the audience, we've got ideas from our candidates. Obviously, the next member for Hammond will have his or her work cut out for him or her over the next 4 years, as will our next state government, whichever side might form it. But thank you to everyone in the audience, to the candidates here this evening, and to the candidate on the video call, for providing some input, for taking an interest in the democratic process, and for believing, I guess, that through a process like this we can find better solutions, or at least talk about them and get them talked about in North Terrace and the places where decisions are made. I'd like to thank Kurt and Jordan up the back for helping out throughout the evening. Thank you very much. Obviously, Election Day is Saturday. You can go to the Electoral Commission of South Australia for information about where and when to vote. I'll be following along with the count here in Hammond at www.murraybridge.news on Saturday night, because I know how to party on a Saturday night. And of course, thank you very much for following along on Murray Bridge News throughout this campaign and into the future. I anticipate that we'll be doing something very similar for the federal election in a couple of months' time, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, candidates, thank you very much. Good luck to each of you. And audience, thanks for coming.
moving on from